gate temperature, and this is that bit is total steam flow. See, some of these are relatively steady, so you can argue that my steady state point starts from here. Fortunately, it is more or less the same for everything. Definitely a period beyond that, before that is not steady state. So the point I make is keep on doing your experiment. And once you get the data, plot it, there you decide this is where from my steady state has started, and this is where I will be. Not only reporting. Measuring has already started right from the time you started your experiments. So everything has a basis. So don't go with the basis that after half an hour. Then,
Okay, so good afternoon everyone. I am Nimish from IIT Bombay, and I am working under Professor Ravindra Gudi on the topic of chemical looping combustion. I have recently got this topic, so I haven't done much. I am still starting with the literature review, but whatever I understood, I will surely try to present it here. Okay, so before getting into this, what exactly chemical looping combustion is, I would like to draw your attention. I would like to sensitize you all that why CO2 actually is a threat, because we are talking since almost a week about CO2 capture, CO2 is a threat and all, but I would just like to drag you the attention to these two figures. In March 2018, the concentration of CO2 was around 409.61 ppm, and in 2019 it is 411.97 ppm. So what would happen if the concentration go beyond 450 ppm? I don't know exactly what are the consequences, but then there would be some catastrophic changes in Earth. So I mean, these are the two figures which indicates that yes, CO2 is a threat, and we need to start in this direction to capture or to mitigate these issues. And yeah, CO2 is one of the largest contributor for the global anthropogenic emissions. So what are the man-made emissions? And largely from that, it is mostly emitted from power plants. It has a major contribution. So yeah, what is carbon capture and storage? So to mitigate the issues of CO2, there could be various technologies or various options, like increasing the efficiency of energy conversion, switching to less intensive fuel, or maybe increasing use of renewable resources, sequestering CO2 by vegetation and the biological absorption, and then comes the CO2 capture and storage. So CO2 capture and storage is very simple, that we produce, simple for the concept I mean, we produce concentrated stream of CO2, it is transported to the storage location, and it is safely stored away from atmosphere for longer time. So chemical looping combustion falls under the category of carbon capture and storage, CCS, and it has the current technology readiness level for 2018 was 6, that is it is at pilot plant level. I will come to this point. Sorry? Yeah. So now as Professor Bhattacharya already told us that now CCS is moving towards CCSU, carbon capture and utilization. So largely because of the drawbacks of cost involved in transportation and the issues of storing the CO2. So I'll like to introduce the concept of chemical looping combustion. So the concept here is that we have two reactors, one is air reactor and other is fuel reactor. So we feed the fuel to the fuel reactor, and whatever air or mainly oxygen which is required for the oxidation of the fuel or the combustion of the fuel, to be more precise, that is, the air is not directly passed to the fuel. So the concept here is that we use a metal oxide. So metal oxide oxidizes or helps in the combustion of the fuel, and the reduced metal oxide, you can see that the oxidation state is reduced here, the number of oxygen is reduced, that goes back to the air reactor, and here the air is used to regenerate or oxidize the metal oxides. So the major amount of heat is liberated in this reactor, which is highly exothermic, as even we discussed today in the morning, that mostly the looping mechanisms, the regeneration process is highly exothermic. So here is the key lies that most amount of energy is liberated in this case. So the thing is that there is no direct contact between fuel and air, which is the usual case in other combustors. That is why it is said that the CLC has an inherent capacity for CO2 separation and having less energy penalty. Yeah, so what is the thing is that you need to clean this gas or to produce the concentrated stream of CO2, lot of energy penalty, lot of cost goes into the carbon, the CO2 capture. So here you are readily getting the pure stream of carbon dioxide, which can be used for transportation and then storage. So this is an advantage which CLC has got. See, now again there is no air coming in direct contact with fuel. So again the issue of nitrogen is solved over here. So whatever the pollutants from coal would be there, that will only result in the fuel gas from this. Again, correct. No need of air separation, but still there are some variants of CLC which requires pure out. We'll come to that again. So just quick thing about the evolution of CLC. So the Lewis and Gilliland used this concept of chemical looping to produce pure carbon dioxide in 1954. So that is where the CLC routes were paved off. Then it was used by Richter and Nosh to increase thermal efficiency in fossil fuels, which was extended by Ishida et al. And they actually termed this, they actually coined this term of chemical looping combustion. And then it was showed by Ishida and Jen that it can be used, it can be the potential option for the CO2 capture, and that was demonstrated by ferrous and nickel based oxygen carriers. So what I was talking was this, that in 2018 the different technologies were segregated as per their current status, and the chemical looping combustion falls in the TRL 6. So it means that there is a lot of things are needed to actually get it commercialized. So there is a lot of research interest lies in this chemical looping combustion. So as far as chemical looping combustion of solid fuels is concerned, there could be broad two types. One is syngas fueled CLC and other could be solid fueled CLC. So syngas fueled CLC is that the solid fuel is gasified first in a separate reactor, in a separate gasifier, and then the syngas is fed to the fuel reactor. Whereas in case of solid fueled CLC, the solid fuel is directly fed to the fuel reactor. So again, as per the type of feeding and the oxygen carriers used, there are two variants. One is in situ gasification. So as here the gasification is being done separately, here the gasification is done in situ in the reactor itself. So the term is in situ gasification, chemical looping combustion. And chemical looping with oxygen uncoupling is that we use special kinds of oxygen carriers which actually generate, or which actually gives oxygen in gaseous form, unlike to the one wherein we are using this redox reactions. I'll come here, yeah. So in this case, as I was saying, that in some variants air separation unit may be required here. So in this case, air separation unit is used to, the oxygen is used to gasify the coal, and then the syngas is fed to the fuel reactor. Then the looping is here, and you get the nitrogen rich air, which can again be used for electricity generation, and the pure stream of CO2 here. So it looks like something this way. So the oxygen carrier has a redox reaction with the volatiles and the H2 also. So as per the studies done, the IGCC, if the similar concept of IGCC is implied with the integrated CLC combined cycle, so if it is made as ICLC-CC, it would have same efficiency as that of the conventional IGCC, but without CO2 capture. So this is the advantage which CLC can give us. So these are the reactions that take place in the in situ gasification chemical looping. So coal first devolatilizes to generate volatiles and the char and volatiles react with the oxygen carrier to produce CO2 and H2O. So these are the reactions taking place in the fuel reactor, and when it comes to the air reactor, this is the regeneration, we can say the regeneration of the metal oxides. So yeah, this is the reactor scheme, a typical reactor scheme for the IGCLC, wherein we feed coal to the fuel reactor, and then the used metal oxides go to the air reactor, they are regenerated, again they are fed back to the fuel reactor. So this is the chemical loop which takes place here. So now the key thing is that the challenge for the IGCLC would be that if the char particles go to the air reactor, if there is entrainment of unconverted char particles to the air reactor, CO2 could come out from this, and we would lose to the carbon capture efficiency in this case. So these are some advantages and challenges for this kind of reactor scheme of chemical looping combustion. Again, ash management is an issue over here because they are having in situ gasification. So if the ash deposits on the metal oxide, that could be again a issue, so which will reduce the reactivity of the metal oxides. So this is the Woodward reaction which we discussed. Okay. Solid form, solid form. So that can be regenerated when it goes to the air reactor. That has to be there, or else the carbon conversion will be again an issue in this case. We have to provide sufficient residence time. Okay, so chemical looping with oxygen uncoupling. So yeah, so that's what, yes. So these are two intercurrent fluidized bed reactors. So there are different, even there are some packed bed reactors, some are rotating reactors which are reported. But then what I haven't done a wide or used survey, literature survey, but whatever I understood, so this is the most commonly used reactor scheme for chemical looping combustion. So here I would again stress on this carbon stripper, because as I said that if carbon unconverted char goes to the air reactor, we will lose on to the carbon capture efficiency. So this is a key thing, or this is what I thought that this is an research, I mean this is an area to be developed. A strong carbon stripper could be the key to increase the carbon capture efficiency in case of CLC. Okay, so this combustion will generate heat, so this loop will be taking care of that. Yes, yes, yes. I think so. I mean, even I'm not sure. Yeah, so the combustion is exothermic reaction. So again, yes, this is endothermic reaction. Even, but then this is highly exothermic reaction. The regeneration reaction is highly exothermic. This is the combustion kind of reaction. So this is exothermic reaction. Yeah, but more amount of heat is required for this, basically the gasification, CO2 gasification. Okay, so in case of chemical looping with oxygen uncoupling, so the thing is here, the metal oxides, as opposed to this case, here the metal oxides was having a redox reaction with the H2CO or the volatile matter, but in this case the metal oxide first decomposes to give gaseous oxygen. So here is the thing, coal, I mean it devolatilizes and decomposes to char as well, but here oxygen carrier gives oxygen first in gaseous form, which then reacts with the char or the volatiles. So the conversion is more in this case, but then again the problem is, that these oxygen carriers are highly costly. And again, if there is ash deposition or even char deposition on the oxygen carrier, that would reduce the efficiency of it. But yes, this would the less metal oxide would be required in this case, because the conversion would be more, because the solid fuel burns with the gaseous oxygen as opposed to the previous case. Yeah, so as I discussed, so there are some fluidized bed reactor as well, some packed bed reactors reported. So this is one of the variant, and again the two loop seal devices are important here, because the entrainment should not be happened. If the char goes to the air reactor, that would be a major loss. So here is the alternate the alternate streams are used. So once the combustion takes place, and in the second pulse there could be regeneration of the metal oxides, wherein this is a packed bed of metal oxides. Char will not come to the air reactor. If char comes to air reactor, we'll get, I'll come to this. If char comes to air reactor, I'll get CO2 in this case, which I don't want. Yes. So we are providing oxygen indirectly. So instead of air, we are using metal oxide to carry the oxygen, and then it is burnt. So yeah, the challenges would be to improve the combustion efficiency, and the oxygen carrier development is again a huge research area. There are lots of material published for different kind of oxygen carrier for different temperatures, different strength, and again ash management is the issue. And as I discussed, I find that this is a challenging thing, the charge separation, because it directly affects the carbon capture efficiency, and if it affects this, then there is no point of CLC, because CLC has the major advantage of getting pure CO2 stream. So I think that's it. So my major work would be involved in the control, to do the dynamic control relevant modeling of chemical looping combustion, and so but I should have a good hand over the process as well. So this is what I've studied till now. I've just got the topic and I have a lot of things to do in this area. Process simulation, yeah, probably in Aspen. Aspen, yes, it is. The modules are available. Thank you. Yes. Yes. But if we supply that oxygen, again lot of cost would go for the air separation unit. Yes. No, I didn't get a point. Yeah. So that's what I said. The carbon stripper would be the separator part, which will. So I have seen some reactor schemes wherein they have used cyclones in this case. So cyclones separate the metal oxides and the anyways, I'll show it later on also. But the unconverted char is again recycled back to the fuel reactor, and the metal oxides goes only to the air reactor. So yeah, that is a challenging thing, but cyclones are widely used in this case. Or double cyclone system is used. So one separates separates the metal oxides and other separates the unconverted char. So that's why I said, so there could be two cyclone systems used in this case, one to separate the metal oxides and other to separate the unconverted char.
Stays, goes to the next air reactor. So very good presentation. So yesterday, any questions? Tomorrow, sorry. Again, tomorrow, any questions on CLC? Don't ask me. I think you have been. So Dr. David, anyone else? No. Others are very shy.
So what is the calculation that is done in this air reactor, let's say iron oxide reactor, from the carbon. Well, good afternoon, and thank you very much, for offering another opportunity, So
Yeah, I mean, actually, it was since like about year 2000, I worked in many different projects on many different technologies for carbon dioxide capture. So that's it. So previously we discussed this physical solvent, and here is one more experience I have for the membrane side. Okay. So I thought, while we are discussing this topic, then any views, suggestions, corrections offered will be very welcome from all of you. Okay. So actually, I mean, I scanned through various files that I had and all that, but okay. This was actually I worked at Cranfield University, UK, in that research group of John Oakey sir and Ben Anthony sir. So yeah, here. So I had done this poster. So I think this itself will summarize anything that I would have wanted to say. So what? Okay, Control L. I think I will do it this way because on and off I will be focusing on different image. So yeah, so basically here the purpose was like for this gas packs project, one part of the project was like the basic overall system design and all that, and the other part was actually that if I can use this, it was like if the thing was that the concept was that gas separation membrane have to be used for separation of carbon dioxide from the flue gas in a post combustion scenario. That was the main thing, but the idea was that whatever flue gas produced by a CCGT, that from that flue gas the idea was to separate carbon dioxide. But again what happens is that this CCGT again is producing something like 3-4%, 5% carbon dioxide, or larger units may also produce for this one basically natural gas powered gas turbine does not produce much carbon dioxide in the flue gas, that is much leaner. So that way for a membrane, the gas transfer in a membrane is the function of the relative concentration of carbon dioxide on either side of the membrane, right? So that was, so idea was that how this carbon dioxide in the flue gas proportion can be raised, So to raise this, the idea was obviously like EGR has been practiced and very well understood, and the same thing was attempted here also. So if EGR is attempted, then this carbon dioxide will raise, and then for the membrane, the idea was to use air as a sweep gas so as to raise the whatever carbon dioxide is produced, quickly dispersing it so that it will further on, carbon dioxide permeation will be happening at an accelerated rate. So that was the whole concept. So yeah, so here I hope it is clear. Yeah. So that was the concept, right? So that atmospheric air as the sweep gas passing through the permeate side of the membrane. Here is the membrane in the middle. So atmospheric air passing through the permeate side and acting as the sweep gas, and thereafter it has been sent to the gas turbine, and whatever flue gas is produced, that flue gas is taken to the other side of the membrane, and carbon dioxide is allowed to pass through. So more things happen. One is that this air is coming with whatever 21% oxygen, but due to this less oxygen available here on the carbon dioxide that side, so part of the oxygen is lost on this side. So that oxygen, so while the carbon dioxide is transferring from this side to this side, at the same time part of the oxygen is also lost from here to this. So that happens. So I mean, I tried to to do some computer programming, and also I used I mean that in conjunction with that thermoflex software and all, to find out that how the whole system dynamics works and what should be the preferable operating zone. So that was my idea of this work. So that was that thermoflex flow sheet and various certain points I tried to get in the Excel, and that data transfer that happens, and that's some automatic calculations and all. So using this I found that various simulations done, and this is the operating point that I had chosen. Operating point chosen because it is the air consumption by the gas turbine being something on top of something 420 kilograms and all that, and this rate of carbon dioxide capture being on the higher side, something like more than 90%, 91, 92%. So that was obviously the preferable operating zone. And the same operating point just made sure through various other topics like carbon dioxide leaving the HRSG, and so basically the same 91% carbon dioxide capture, 90% carbon dioxide capture, and what are the other parameters I just tried to evaluate for a wide variety of this proportion of flue gas transferred to the membrane. All of that. Again here same point. Here is this proportion of carbon dioxide entering the gas turbine. So this was the program, computer program made. So it basically it was whole loop actually, that it accepted inputs from that what percentage of the air is to be transferred and all that, and then it fed the relevant data to the thermoflex. From thermoflex it calculated the resulting flue gas composition and all that, and then resulting that composition, that is again going back to the Excel, and that Excel is again giving rise to the another set of conditions, and likewise it was a loop. So I had used this Alstom GT26 for these simulations, and likewise, okay, now I can just go to the full size. Where is? Yes. Okay. this is to be shown. So at the end, I just realized that more than 29% carbon dioxide composition is the desirable condition. That is one thing that is the feed condition. If this is realized from the gas turbine, then it becomes the preferable condition for the membrane operation and for the whole system to be operating in a more efficient way. So that was the realized. And then actually for the membrane operation also did various calculations for the power consumption for the vacuum pump and all that. I realize this seems to be the zone of interest for the membrane development. That is okay, that will be appearing here, I think. Actually, I tried to estimate that what is the barer of the membrane, what sort of permeability, and basically, out of this work, I realized that although, the efforts were more directed towards getting the most selective membrane, but I realized that for this application, actually, it is not that the most selective membrane is required, but actually more permeable membrane is required for this application. So that was the major conclusion of this, all these exercise. So that is it. And what is this? Yeah, so the mass transfer area and all. So the basic part is that this gas turbine part was done by the thermoflex, but membrane part was done programming in this Excel. So that was it. So using that, I realized that membrane area for a variety of different membrane area, that is like starting from 20 million square meters up to last is 90 million square meters. For that kind of area, this is the rate of carbon dioxide capture from flue gas, and this is the rate of oxygen loss and the composition of carbon dioxide in the permeate. So all these three parameters have been plotted for different, depending on the membrane size, what sort of performance is anticipated. So that was calculated. And obviously this is like a certain amount of permeability and all has been assumed based on various literature data. So again, this whole thing depends on the selected kind of membrane is really available in the right set of configuration. And this is it. So the effect of permeability of carbon dioxide and oxygen through the membrane. So this is the permeability of carbon dioxide. If it varies from, let us say, 5000 barer up to 35,000 barer, then what will be the effect on this rate of oxygen loss and composition of carbon dioxide in permeate, etc., as well as this is possibly the membrane area in million square meters. So these all things were done. So now okay, that is it. So actually any questions I will be happy to answer. Where does the sweep air, it is all described here. It goes directly into gas turbine. Gas turbine requires air, but here that sweep air first passing and then going to gas turbine. Yes. So here that air is first passing through this permeate side of the membrane and then it goes to the gas turbine compressor and cycle. This one? Okay.
So the choice of the sweet gas
Just yeah, and then it goes, basically, pressure gradient has to be maintained here. So the power consumption of the vacuum pump has also been estimated and shown in this graph and all.
Let's finish off everything on gasification so that tomorrow we start with something completely new. And I really want later on.
So this essentially came up from one of the questions that Saurabh raised and someone also had raised. So I thought it would be good to have an example of how to extract the kinetics data and also the different use of the different literature models from laboratory data, how that is used or that is misused can be very good. So this work was done by Joanne Tanner back in 2013-14, and she looked at the kinetics of CO2 and steam gasification for our chars. So as you know, when we talk about gasification, we usually refer to the gasification of the char, right? Not the coal as a whole. Coal gives you the after pyrolysis gives you the volatile gases which you want to preserve as much as possible, and then the solid char is what you want to convert using the gasification agents, which is partial oxygen and CO2 and steam. So partial oxygens with C, that's easy to know, but the CO2 and steam gasification kinetics is often a bit different. It depends on the type of the char, where the char has come from, how it is developing, and how it is as it gets converted, how it's deactivating, all those kinds of things. So the purpose of this particular work in her case was that to look at the three different models that people use from literature straight away, their application, and then the variation in the predictions matched against what the TGA exactly produces. So so the way she did was, in these three different steps, she prepared the char at 6 seconds at 1000 degrees centigrade using nitrogen, high purity nitrogen, in the drop tube furnace, in one of the in the small drop tube furnace that we showed, 1.2 meter tall, 1.8 meter tall, atmospheric pressure. It was a drop tube furnace, not entrant flow, not the bigger one. The bigger one has been used by others, which again also I have showed to you. And then after preparing the char at that temperature, she stored them. Then she subjected those to TGA under different conditions of CO2 concentration, in this instance varying from 30 to 90% CO2. So it's, in reality you want to get to that high, and the rest is nitrogen gas. And in another series of experiments, she used 30 to 70% steam, but in reality you will not be going to that amount of steam. It is being practically high. But again, you know, scientific investigations, you can do whatever you want to do, and then that will provide you at the very least mechanistic insights, and parts of the experimental work will give you results that will be beneficial. So you can actually from these experiments you can do two things. One is you can see which models are applicable for prediction of the char conversion rate for your char. That's number one. Whether that usefully predicts the behavior of your char or not. It may be, it may be not. And if not, then you find out why not. And if you see that all models have different predictions which are not matching with the experiments, then you know that this model is not good or this model is not good, etc. And sometimes you have the other side of the coin. You also see that all of the models predict to some extent in the same manner. The predictions are the same. So then you realize that these models are, any of these, the easier ones can be useful to put in the CFD models for the overall gasifiers simulation. At that time, we were looking at the low temperature region of the gasification. So we decided we'll use 1000 degrees, and she was the early first PhD student working in that. So the 1000 degree drop tube furnace was working. That's right. Oh yes, okay. So 900 degrees centigrade for 7 minutes. That's for the determination of volatile matter. That's how it is represented or presented in any technique. Yes, that's right. At any temperature you produce the char, some volatiles will be there. So essentially the purpose of it was to see, okay, if I produce the char in a drop tube furnace then it is a char produced in a high heating rate equipment. Then I examine its reactivity through the TGA experiments, and then see that reactivity can be explained by any of the existing models or not. So that's the purpose. So that's the whole purpose. I wouldn't say that 1000 degrees and 6 seconds is the condition that you will use in a commercial gasifier. No. In the commercial gasifier, what I showed in the subsequent lectures, that for gasification of complete carbon conversion of our ones, you need about 1200 to 1300 degrees centigrade for 7 seconds. That's enough, but in this case the objective was different. The objective was whether the existing models can predict reliably the reactivity of the char produced in a high heating rate equipment, which is in this case a drop tube furnace operating at 30. Yeah. Yeah. So. Yes. Yeah. So if you can recall, in another presentation, I had another student who worked with, he produced the char, then he collected and put back, and then collected and put back until he got 100% carbon conversion that way. So that was another piece of work wherein the student determined that you need about 24 seconds if for carbon conversion, full carbon conversion, if you are operating the gasifier at 1000 degrees. But if you are operating the gasifier at 1300 degrees, then within 7 seconds, not 24 seconds, within 7 seconds you can get full carbon conversion. Here in this case, let's see what she did. Okay. So let's keep in mind that the two reactions that she was looking at, one is carbon dioxide gasification, so it's a gas solid reaction, of course endothermic, and the other one is carbon steam reaction, again a gas solid reaction, endothermic. One produces only carbon dioxide, carbon monoxide, the other one produces a mix of carbon monoxide and hydrogen in 1:1. Okay. So so that's a distinction important, and then also she looked at effect of the catalytic elements present in the char at the end of the pyrolysis, and what are those ones. So I'm not discussing that one in here. The paper has been kept in the drop tube with 10R so and so in that name, so have a read of it. The purpose is to show you how the char preparation and the subsequent TGA analysis and subsequent adoption of the different literature available models can give varying results or completely non-varying results. So that's the purpose of this particular one. So let's bring our memory back to this curve that we showed. Remember, in the x-axis you have the temperature or the inverse of it, and then y-axis you have the conversion rate. So you will have distinctly three zones. Right on the rightmost side, it is a chemical reaction control zone. Remember, this is plotted as inverse of temperature. So the right hand side means low temperature. And on the leftmost side, it is the diffusion control, or also called mass transfer control. It's called regime 3, and external diffusion control, I mean. So external diffusion means if you have the particle, as we showed, if you have the particle surrounding that, you have a presence of a gas cloud, the reactant oxygen or CO2 or steam, whatever be the case, they have to overcome that barrier. That's external diffusion or mass transfer control, mass transfer region. That's what it means in here. Here, that's the barrier. Okay, and then in between is the pore diffusion control. Means when the reactant has been able to come to the surface, overcoming the barrier of the surrounding gases, it has been able to come to the surface, but then it has to enter the pore, because the pores are all tiny. And that's where Knudsen diffusion will be controlling now, because the size of the pores in some cases are very, very small compared to the mean free path of those gaseous reactant molecules. Okay, so let's see, keep this in mind, that if you plot from your experiments conversion rate versus the inverse of temperature, you will see 3 distinct regions, if you are lucky, which you will immediately know which is the temperature below which, what is the temperature below which you are chemical reaction controlled, you are in the chemical reaction controlled regime, and above which temperature you are in the mass transfer control regime. So this will also be useful in your case. If you can properly do that in the TGA, you should be able to find out in presence of your oxygen carrier what region of TGA experiments will give you the true activation energy. Because as I said, it is very important to get that information, even though in reality this is what will be dominating. Okay. So, these are the some of the coals that our students normally use, simply because these 3 varieties of the coals are the ones that are used in our power stations day in, day out, and for each of those she had the composition of the coal, and for each of those then she had the composition of the char generated at 1000 degrees for 600 in the drop tube furnace. Okay. So that's why for each of those coals she has 2 different descriptions, coal and char. Then for the same, she also has the coal and char, the ash analysis, because it's very, very important to appreciate that as you gasify, you will be concentrating the ash. If the particles are not fragmenting, particularly in the TGA experiments, there the particles are not fragmenting because the particles are not going to the high temperature environment right all on a sudden. They are right from the beginning, so they will not be fragmenting. So there, all sorts of models will be, conditions will be valid. So, okay, something else as well. And then the important thing that she also did was measured the composition of the 2 catalytic elements, sodium and potassium. She did not have the time to measure the iron content, which is also a catalyst, but at least these 2 in the char by normal X-ray fluorescence method. And then she also looked at the physical properties of the char samples, and the physical properties of the char are the porosity done by mercury porosimetry. So that's indicated as Hg porosity percent. That means these chars were 76% to 84% porous, very large porosity. Mercury is a very large molecule. So the way the mercury porosimetry works is that if you have a material, if you want to see measure its porosity, the standard is that you force it high pressure mercury into it, and whatever amount of mercury that you have been able to force in, that represents the volume of the pores. So that's the standard. Instead of mercury, it could be anything else, which was stable or which would have stayed. But in this case, mercury is the choice. That's the universally accepted standard for measuring porosimetry. And the most important thing is looking at the surface area, CO2 surface area, meter squared per gram of the char. So you can see this huge number. Right? So between these two, these tell you that these are actually not only porous, but also they are very, very high surface area. Porosity does not necessarily mean high porosity does not necessarily mean high porosity. It can be just a hollow football, no pores rather than the one whole hollow thing. So you can measure its volume, but it's just like the sponge. Sponge is only this bit, but its surface area inside the sponge is huge just because of the existence of the spores. That's why it can absorb so much liquid. So it's important to realize that these chars from our coals can be very, very porous. That has important implication for the gasification. What she didn't do is to look at the size of the pore. That can also be done by pore size distribution, because some of the pores may be much larger than the CO2 molecule, which is about 3.33 angstrom, or some of the pores can be much larger than the steam molecule, which I forgot whatever it is. So it's very important to find those things out, those who are doing working in that area. The point I try to make is that this information are now available. This information can be easily generated by the students nowadays in the lab quite quickly, within a half a day. There is nothing. Okay. So the question here is which method is good for measuring the surface area? These are just numbers. These are telling you that these have very high porosity and high surface area. This can be measured by pumping in CO2 or by pumping in nitrogen. Okay. And these two techniques work, and for that actually the theory is available, that how much gas has been able to be forced in and therefore has been absorbed. That allows it some density functional theory calculations, as it is called, can be carried out to find out the surface area measured by nitrogen method or the CO2 method. The nitrogen method gives you a much lower number because it is carried out. That's why, don't worry. So because it is carried out at low temperature, close to 0 degrees, in fact sub-zero. So at sub-zero degrees what happens is the pores collapse. So that means you will always see pores collapse means not much surface area available. So you will see the numbers much smaller. So CO2 surface areas are done at ambient conditions. So the surface area numbers are higher, but these are all numbers. So if you had chart number 1, chart number 2, chart number 3, whether you do it on the basis of nitrogen or CO2, surface area really doesn't matter, because all you are trying to show that this one is more porous than the other or this one is less porous than the other, nothing else. Shouldn't be reading too much into it. Okay. Okay. So let's see some of the results that she produced. I haven't copied everything in here. So one is 90% CO2 going into, these are from the TGA experiments, where she took the char from the drop tube furnace, which was prepared at 1000 degrees at about 6 seconds residence time, and subjected those char. From those char, she separated two fractions out. One is a very large size fraction, other one is a small size fraction. And then in between she did something else as well, different distinct ones. But here she is showing only the two extremes. They were subjected to, both of those size ranges were subjected to the same amount of CO2 concentration. So 90% CO2 means other 10% is nitrogen. And in the lower one, again the same particle size range, she very carefully selected them, separated them and selected them, and subjected them to highest possible steam condition. Again, it is very important to remember what is the purpose of it, purpose of the exercise. The purpose of the exercise was to see what reactivity she can calculate from the conversion rate. Rate of conversion is nothing but reactivity. That means at what rate the carbon is getting converted, that is also reactivity. So that's how it is. So if you look at the x-axis and the y-axis, then you'll see x-axis the time is expressed in minutes in TGA. That's what you will see, because TGA is a very, very slow heating rate process, but very controlled, 10 degrees centigrade per minute, whereas in a gasifier, drop tube furnace or entrained flow gasifier, the heating rate is well over 10,000 K per second. So there, that's why it is very, very fast over there. So again, it shouldn't be, this is a relative comparison of the reactivity and nothing else. Yeah, so what she did was, she put the char in the crucible of certain size, and then she raised the temperature to different levels in different experiments. In some cases, if you see the inset box, 650, 700, 750, 800, 850, 900, 1000, in order to see how temperature also affects the conversion time and therefore the rate of conversion. Rate of conversion is easy to calculate because everything was heated at 10 degrees centigrade per minute. Now, so it was taken to 700 and then kept at 700, or it was taken to 850 and then taken to 850, kept at 850, and then you have kept it for a long time. How long? In this instance, she has plotted up to 80 minutes just to see what happens after reaching the temperature. How long does it take to for the conversion to reach to the to actually plateau out? If not, then just say that okay, my cutoff point is at 80 minutes. Within that, whatever I have got, I have got. No. So time to is 10 degrees centigrade per minute heating. So 700 degree 70 minutes, and then you keep it for any other time. She has correct. So here the x-axis starts from 0 minute. That means only when it has reached its desired experimental temperature, that's the beginning of the time.
At that point of time, you introduce the char.
No, the char was always there right from the beginning.
But then I think the
Correct. Because the TGA is constantly measuring you the weight. So when it has reached your, so let's pick one temperature. Let's pick one experiment, say 850. It will release some amount of volatile, and how much it is releasing, you can see it from the TGA. Absolutely precisely. The furnace, you can't open it. So what will happen, you think? Good question. I was expecting it. Good question. What will happen? Yes, that's true. That's true. I cannot refute that argument. Yeah, so, correct. It's very interesting to see PhD students straight away going to the most complicated set of arguments. Life is much simpler than that. See, what happens is, if you take a particle, if you heat it too fast, what will happen? Particle, the thermal shock, the volatiles will try to come out in a vigorous manner, and the particle will crack. And why? Because the particle is not able to heat up at the same rate that you are applying the heat from outside to the furnace. So you only heat it at a slow rate that the particle can absorb and then get heated. So remember, in one of the presentation I said that you have to do, in order to report certain TGA based measurements, you have to do many initial experiments with establishing the flow rate of the gas, which gives you the diffusion free zone or overcomes the diffusion barrier. You have to decide what's the particle size is, what's the crucible size is, what the crucible depth is, what's the heating rate is, so that you create a condition which gives you a stable condition for reportable experiments. So that's very important. So that in itself is all the initial experiments that one has to carry out before coming to a set of conditions under which the experiments will be done. So it's just like a baby. If you want to feed the baby too much through its mouth, the baby will go, right? So you feed the baby a little bit at a time, so the baby can take them in, digest them in, otherwise it will throw it out. Similarly, exactly the same argument. Okay. So the point I'm making is, you put the char there, slowly heat it up, even if it is required 5 degrees centigrade per minute or 2 degrees centigrade per minute, do it that way. Of course, in the process of heating, it might, even though it is char, it might lose some volatiles, but who cares? How it will gasify? Because if you are heating it up with nitrogen, you are not introducing any gases at any time, so that, is it raining outside? Okay, so stop. Okay, so once it has reached your desired experimental temperature, then you start injecting the reacting agent, which is carbon dioxide or steam or a mix of them, so that you are not doing the gasification from the beginning. Sending the gas, reacting gas from the beginning is not going to help anyway, because at ambient conditions 100, 200, 300, 400, 500, 600 degrees, because nothing is going to happen anyway until it starts time. It reaches a certain temperature, nothing is going to happen anyway. So only when you start injecting from the time that it has reached the temperature, that's when you do it. So this is how this was done. So the message that we would like you to take, if you take any of these boxes, you will see that the lowest temperature of 600 takes very long time to give you high carbon conversion. So this is, for example, 600, and then comes 700, then 750, then 1000, etc. So it is relatively, it is showing, in relative terms, it is showing that as temperature increases, progressively it is taking less and less time to get converted. Okay, so that's how you'll be looking at it. So looking at the 1, 2, 3, 6, 7 from the bottom, 6, 7, 7, between 750 and 800, there is a huge jump. Much quickly it starts to convert, much quickly. Below that, nothing is happening, not much, almost the same, slowly. So 750 onwards it jumps, then 850 or 800 it becomes even faster, and then 900 it becomes even faster, and 9,000 degrees it becomes almost instantaneous. Temperature wise, no, we wouldn't try to get hold of a time from here that will be corresponding to the entrained flow gasifiers time. Entrained flow gasifiers will be limited to about 7-8 seconds anyway. That's what the gasifier manufacturers will give you. So here your only comparison you are making is that as you increase the temperature from 600 to 900, by what ratio the conversion rate increases. That's only that it becomes 1.8 times or 2 point something times, etc. That's how you should be looking at. And you should be looking also, telling yourself that between 700 and 600 and 700, etc., nothing much will be happening. So better not to concentrate on that. 800 onwards, it really, things really start to pick up quite fast, and then that's how it is. Diffusion control or mass transfer control. Right. That's what you are doing anyway in your simulation of entrained flow gasification. That's precisely what you are doing. But remember, I said that even though the activation energy that you will be getting from this will be corresponding to the zone of pore diffusion, the external diffusion, everything included in there, that means you will have to supply less energy because you already have supplied that energy. So your activation energy, if you can calculate it at the chemical reaction controlled zone, that's the maximum amount of energy that will be required. How you give it, it's up to you. And you give it in the entrained flow condition by preheating the entrained flow reactor. So somehow or the other you have to give that energy, no escaping. So there is no substitute for not calculating the activation energy, not determining the activation energy in the chemically reaction controlled rate region. And that's what these experiments can actually do very nicely, and we'll see. Char. Who can remember how much I said? Yeah. So you are testing me, right? You remember everything. So what happens if you, instead of 10 milligram, if you use 50 milligram? Amount to be larger, therefore you will be diffusion controlled because the gases have to diffuse in current. Yeah. Good. Correct. Compared to the kinetics of CO2 gasification. Yeah. So in the slides where I presented Tao Shu's work, I can't remember which one, and maybe lecture number 4 or something. That's where we had CO2 and water. CO2 and steam mix. Yeah. So usually steam conversion, steam reactivity is about 1.8 to 2 times the CO2 gasification reactivity at 900 degrees. Okay. Above that, double. Well, double is what else? Oh no. Yeah, not an order of magnitude. Okay, so it's one observation that you have already made, that steam gasification is faster. So in the fluidized bed gasifier, you need to put steam to control the temperature, but also it helps in the gasification because it makes everything faster. Right? But steam comes at a cost. And then what can you do? So essentially then the dx dt, which is the rate of conversion, which means reactivity, is a function of all of these factors. The concentration of the gas, whether it is 20% or 30% or 70% or 90%, and the temperature of the particle, and of course the conversion itself. Because as conversion increases, we won't take much more time, but let's finish it today. I have only 3-4 more slides. As conversion increases, then the char will become less and less reactive, and you will actually see it. So that char eventually, if no point trying to gasify it, it's much better to bring it back to the first stage of the gasifier, which is the combustion inside, so that convert it that way to as a CO2. That CO2 then becomes a reactant within the system. So then what she did was she applied the 3 different models, very popular in the literature. One is the volumetric model. The second one is it's called grain model, but it's also called shrinking core model. And then the other one is random pore model. So volumetric model, the assumption is that the entire volume of the char reacts in one go with the reactant. Shrinking core model means it is reacting from the surface only, and then surface char is gone, the next surface is exposed, the next surface is exposed, etc. So it's a shrinking core or the grain model. And the other one is the random pore model. Very popular with the students as well, because they can do a little bit of mathematical manipulation, and the factor psi, which is a structural parameter, which is nothing but a fitting parameter, very difficult to measure, is extremely popular with the students. So it's so therefore it was also popular with her. But anyway, so what she did was she applied the experimental conversion data to these individual models. I have put the paper in the Dropbox. So it gives you the actual conversion from the separable form to nonlinear to the linear form, second column to the third column. It is pretty well known, but then let's take you to the results, the two boxes at the bottom. Yeah. So the two boxes at the bottom, this is only for the char conversion. The x-axis is the time of the conversion, and she applied the volumetric model, shrinking core model, and the random pore model, and the experimental data essentially fitted almost all of this, all the three models in a linear manner. And then I'm just trying to look at what's number B, because this fit of experimental, then fit of experimental results to the random pore model. Y-axis is nothing but a value, an arbitrary value that is against which it is in arbitrary units. It is unitless. If you fit the experimental data to the linear form of the different models on column 3, then it gives you a value for the left hand side, k VMT in one case, k GMT in another case, k times t, so means rate times the time, rate constant multiplied by the time, rate constant, so-called rate constant for the volumetric model, rate constant for the shrinking core model, etc. So it's not really a comparable data, because the time is different, the rate can be different, but it is the total of it, that's what it is there. Second one is the experimental data for the structural, for the random pore model. In the first case, all you are doing is you are actually predicting what will happen if you take the char conversion for a particular size, which is the larger particle size. It is actually fit of the experimental data at a particular temperature, 800 degrees. It is experimental data fitted to the three different models, but only at one temperature of 800 in this instance, because correct. Yes. So what it is showing is that this is taken the all the data points are from a particular temperature. So she has done the experiments at 600, 700, 750, 800, 850, 900 and 1000. So she has arbitrarily taken the data from the 800. She has of course done the other ones as well. Fitted the conversion from the experimental data to these individual models between the conversion of 10% to 50% range, and then see whether the models are predicting whether the fit is linear or not. If it was not linear, that means the model prediction will be always a straight line. If the data all doesn't fit on the fall on that straight line, that means it's a nonlinear fit, that basically means the volume model will not be applicable or the random pore model will not be applicable. So in this instance, what it's seeing that all the experimental data at that particular temperature are falling on the straight line. So that means they are linear, which means it matches with the volumetric model, or in fact the shrinking core model or the random pore model for that particular chart. And then she then looked at the 900 degrees and 1000 degrees, exactly the same. So all the data were very linear. Otherwise you will have seen some sort of this, and you will see for bituminous coals that sort of non-linear representation. All models will not be valid, only the ones which is close to linear or linear. Close to linear means the correlation coefficient is very high. So the linear, there's a straight line across that, it is falling just around on either side of it, but the correlation coefficient is, regression coefficient is correct. This is for our brown coal. Random pore. So random pore was generated purely because of that, that the other models were not uniformly able to predict the behavior of the gasification performance of the bituminous coal charts. Yeah. So, so the volume reaction means what? As I say, the entire volume, including pores, the volume inside the pores, volume outside will react. So if your experimental data matches with the volume reaction model, then that means the volume reaction model is valid to describe the gasification behavior with of that particular chart. If not, then you test with the other one, then you test with the other one, and then whichever matches, you say that this model matches very well, therefore this is the model that I will use in my computational fluid dynamics modeling calculations. Why it works well? Because for some coals, the variation of the structure, as the structure changes over time, that affects the gasification reactivity. From the time it is very reactive to less reactive to completely unreactive, as I mentioned before, that is captured by that structural parameter. That describes the variation in the development of the structure. Correct. That's the whole. So if you look at Bhattia's original work in 1987, everyone uses actually the expression. But if you read that particular paper, how he introduced the term psi to describe the structural changes taking place, that's what will tell you what you are looking at. That the structure becomes more and more ordered gradually. Yeah. So to you it is clear. So for the benefit of everyone else, let me tell you, if temperature is very high and very high, who cares what the structural parameter is, because I will be able to convert the carbon with the help of the high amount of energy available supplied to the high temperature. So all these structural effects of the variation in the structure on the reactivity, these are more dominant in the low temperature zone. Nevertheless, it is important, because if you are doing the gasification at the low temperature zone, then your structural variations are going to affect. Okay. So it's important. Yeah. Mm. Yeah, so there what you do is you're talking about incorporating the kinetics from the chemical reaction control zone into the model. But then the model takes care of the temperature bit, right? And that's the point I have been making all along, that there is no substitute for not knowing the activation energy or the kinetics parameters at the chemical reaction controlling zone, because that amount of energy somehow you will have to supply. And you are supplying that at the high temperature zone when you, in your model, use fixing the temperature at a very high level, whatever. Right? So you are not contradicting anything. Okay? So anyway, so then let's stick to this, and then this is more about the last model, the random pore model, and this parameter to over there is what she is plotting against for different temperatures. And it looks like all of those at all of those temperatures, these are that particular model is also applicable, right? So what it is telling us, the volumetric model matches, the shrinking core model matches, random pore model also matches, which is basically telling us that for these charts, psi and etc., it doesn't mean anything. So then that's the conclusion from this simple mathematical representation of the experimental data against the model. So but then is there any proof that the conclusion that we're making, that structural variation is not going to affect? Yes, it is. That's the proof. See, she very carefully looked at a whole range of charts, about I think 100 different charts, and then she found that there are 4 distinctly different types of charts that are collected from the drop tube furnace at 1000 degrees. Some is the one in the left is very thin walled hollow. The other one is very, very porous, more porous, somewhat porous, all sorts of things. So it's basically she's telling that there is not much really of a structural variation, partly hollow or fully hollow, and so much hollow that the gases can go in and then do whatever they want to do. It will take some time, but it can do get the reaction going for up to a certain conversion, until the ash content becomes dominating, that there are little carbon left, more ash, which will be difficult to convert. So that's why she did it only, plotted this only between 10% char conversion and 50% char conversion. So char is already 50% of the coal. So her char is actually 50% of the coal. So 50% of that 50% is only 25%. So the other bit is all ash, because ash is not going anywhere. Ash is not illustrating any TGA experiment as such. It's still staying there. So beyond that 50% char conversion, there is no point trying to extract the kinetics, because it will be a fruitless exercise. It will be a, it will not be a representative of carbon CO2 reaction or carbon steam reaction. Because carbon is little, very much is ash. So am I making sense? And then she started plotting all of this data against the inverse of temperature. And then you can see there are 3 distinct ranges. Okay, the x-axis on the top is temperature, and the y-axis, x-axis at the bottom is the inverse of temperature. So there are 3 different, distinctly different zones that you can see, which corresponds to the chemical reaction rate controlling, and the left side is definitely diffusion controlling, external diffusion controlling, and somewhere in between is the blank zone, pore diffusion control. So those 3 zones that you have. So this type of analysis, experiments with the char in the TGA, can easily tell you an answer to your question that where my chemical reaction control regime stops for these conditions of particle and this reactant concentration here. And for this, for the steam, it is more or less here, because steam gasification is faster, so it is a much, at least 100 degrees centigrade lower temperatures. So that's the kind of message that you can get it, and she did it for different coals now. Before that we are showing for one coal for different particle sizes with different CO2 concentration and different steam concentration, etc. And for different coals, the chars from the different coals, they are not very much different. Okay, at least in our case, for our type of coals. So that's the sort of information that you can easily develop and then find out this is my chemical reaction controlling zone, so that if I am asked to find the true activation energy, next time I will be carrying out my experiments below 900 if it is with CO2, or below 800 if it is with steam, and then feed that data to the modelers. They will then do their bit. Okay. And then the same thing as well with the previous one was with conversion, and this is with log of the rate constant K. It's essentially separating K from K2, KT, again for different particle sizes. And for these particle sizes, the determination she has met is completely done, is that either this small one or that large one, they are the chemical reaction control zone for this type of chars, because they are so porous that for this both it is giving the same chemical reaction controlling rate region. So if you are trying to measure the activation energy, chemical reaction control, true activation energy, don't worry about doing it for either the large one or the small one. It will still be getting the same result. And then she looked at, I think this is the last slide, she looked then, from there she looked at the activation energy and the pre-exponential constants. So this is the most important bit that we are worried at or concerned about. They are more or less same, right? Whether small particle or large particle, small or large, for all practical purposes they are same. And if you do the sufficient number of experiments, you have 3 different variables: the reaction order, the activation energy, and the pre-exponential constants. So for any particular size, if you do at least 3 sets of experiments at 3 different temperatures, at least 3, the more the better, then you can get the 3 variables out. Okay? So it is also important from that point of view that from the simple TGA experiments, provided you know how to do it, you can get the reaction order also. So you know everything that will go into your CFD. And you need all 3 in your CFD, right? So that's basically it. So that's the one I think I wanted to show because Saurav raised it. So I have finished what I wanted to share with you on gasification. But you know, of course, we haven't gone into the absolute details of. There are a lot more to gasification than this. But at your level, whatever I think is important for you know, that's what I have shared. But there are a lot of others that you can go to. So this presentation is also available in the drop tube. The paper is also available. So at some point, if you have interest, at least you know where to find what. These are simple things, but you know, if for some reason we're not done, so we just got it done and then published. But to the engineering companies, they know it. So tomorrow we will be starting afresh. We will be looking at a wide variety than just normal combustion and gasification as we have discussed. We'll be moving away to oxy-fuel, oxy-CFBC, chemical looping, for which he has set the scene nicely, so it will make my life easier. And then direct carbon fuel cell. Dr. Shukanto Das will be talking about the amine capture based things. So we'll be on track. Okay. It depends on what you are trying to model. If you are trying to model the rate of carbon conversion and the gas composition, it really doesn't matter how much bed material or how much ash is there, unless it is part of the coal or part of the char, which it is not. So you'll still be getting the same information if you find the true activation energy and the pre-exponential constant and the reaction order, which is a function of the type of coal or type of char, not a function of fixed bed or fluidized bed or entained flow, right? These are intrinsic properties to the material, of the material. Yes. Correct. So you need to know all 3, and the order can also be different. So that's why I say that you cannot arbitrarily take anything from the literature and put it into a model and expect it to work. It may or it may not. Much better is to generate your experimental data and then do everything. But in order to do that, you need to know the fundamentals, and that's the one that I'm trying to convey to you. If you just feeding CO2. So who can comment on it? Have you got your answer? No. Yeah. So the thing is, you can supply the CO2 or steam or both. Right. The problem is, you supply steam only when you use a gasifier which runs at low temperature. Otherwise, you don't need steam. Why would you give steam? Steam is very expensive. So that steam will definitely give you the reaction. Now you are saying, I will also recycle CO2, which is fantastic. And we have shown a lot of data with CO2 gasification. Everyone is now doing it. But CO2 gasification produces what? CO. So at the gasifier outlet, you are getting predominantly CO, right? If you want to feed back, recycle back CO2, then you have to burn that CO and then bring back the CO2. Okay. And if you only want to use steam, you still have to supply the heat, which means you still have to supply certain amount of oxygen to burn the carbon to generate the exothermic heat to sustain the endothermic reactions, right? In that case, you are getting a mix of carbon monoxide and hydrogen, and of course CO2 coming, some CO2 coming from the pyrolysis stage in that. So if you want to bring that CO2, you will be much better off to bring that CO2 back from the after the gas has been combusted. Otherwise, you are looking at cooling down the gas to that 260 degrees, clean them, do this cleaning, that cleaning, etc. Then burn it, generate CO2, and then separate the CO2 through membranes or whatever means, and then bring it back. So technically, yes, it will work, give some CO2 so that it will be recycling, and then also give some steam at the same time, so that it will make everything faster, as these results are showing. Everything is possible, but usually that is not done that way, because it becomes so much complicated. Because you have to cool down the gas, then you have to separate, then you have to bring back, or you have to cool down the gas to such an extent that the water vapor actually doesn't condense, and then compress it and then bring it back. But all of this will simply raise the complexity of the situation, nothing else. But theoretically possible, absolutely right. So you can do simple Aspen Plus calculation. Set up a R-Gibbs model in Aspen Plus, generate CO and whatever you want to generate, and then progressively bring back, just have a loop, and then bring it back, and then see what happens, whether the net change in heat is 0 or not, which means you are not inadvertently supplying heat from outside, or there is heat deficits. You can do that. You can do all sorts of calculations, but realistically that is not done yet. Worth trying. Not everything that we do in the lab is for practical purpose anyway. It's for understanding. Where in intent? You have to use the chemically controlled condition based kinetic constants, because the other parts of the model simply by temperature will take care of the rest. You cannot put an apparent kinetic data in the model. You are trying to model the intent flow gasifier at 800 degrees centigrade. Yeah. You can do anything that you like in modeling. That will not be realistic. Nah, absolutely invalid. Whatever you do, you have to feed in the kinetics Yeah. If you do that,
then the rest is taken care of by your temperature in the model. One thing that you can do it as a trial to satisfy your inclusiveness is that you take the activation energy as half, which is for the middle range, the core diffusion. The problem that will be what is the corresponding A value, what is the corresponding B value. So this is an exercise of curiosity.
But it will not be valid.
High pressure.
High pressure. I only did that.
Right? model, but as soon as you put your reaction pressure low, below 25 bar, you will not see that effect of that reaction coming in any of the predictions.
It will eventually increase the combustion.
I think for flexible reasons, to make your model flexible, put everything there. Some of the contribution of some of the models, if we automatically neglect, such as the methylation reaction, and the valid ones it will automatically take. So don't exclude anything, because you will come and go from this place. And someone else may be fitting with the particular model, which you are. And that person may not be knowing that you thought this equation, this reaction is not valid, is required by eliminating. And for some reason, if he wants to do it at a high pressure, he will be missing out on a big component. So have everything there. The model itself is solid, it's so out.
And the oxidation reactions also, let's say, if the oxidation is supported by this partial oxidation, so amount is substoichiometric. So the combined reaction method should be used to combine this oxidation reaction. So we will see otherwise partial oxidation, C plus oxidation is C. So both should be included, or they should be swapped. In some reasons, they are oxidation likely.
You are able to see, isn't it, from your model prediction, whether you have far too much heat available. So you make sure that far too much heat is not available. Just enough heat available to sustain the reactions, plus 1% heat loss. And if you can ensure that, then automatically the other oxidation, the oxygen consumption or oxygen supply rate, you can vary it accordingly. But if you give too much, I don't know how your model works. If you give too much oxygen, then you will see a lot of excess heat is available. That heat is being simply lost from the system. Make sure that your heat loss is kept at 1% of the heat input, and that's it. So you cannot take arbitrarily any amount of oxygen and give
more CO2 than is required. Correct. Okay. Yeah. In the commercial ones, 1% of the total heat loss is the most relevant. In the large pilot plants that I had showed, between 3 and 5%. I think including 1% heat loss will be, because will be appropriate, because whatever the reactor is, large gasifier, there will be heat loss. Pyrolysis model. Now, I think most people put in CPD, but that's not something that you should be putting in, because you need to separately test the CPD model with your TGA data from pyrolysis experiment. If it matches, then having the CPD there will be fine, but having the CPD there without testing the validity of it is a very tricky, questionable step, because if that predicts more than the more pyrolysis, volatile matter, and composition, etc. What the CPD model does, CPD model tells you how much volatile it will be yielded and what is the composition of the volatiles. If those two are wrong, then a good part of your coal gasification composition, gas composition will be wrong. So test the CPD. If you see that this CPD model is not giving you a result, just put in your pyrolysis vapors as pyrolysis yield and composition as an input. And that must be just an UDF, I would suppose. That's the point I have been always making. Do your own experimental data. Whether it is kinetics or pyrolysis, easy to do. You will, otherwise towards the end of your PhD writing, you'll be scratching your head. For me, it would be difficult. For him, it is fine. But I've got my PhD a few years ago. Huh? 1994. So, yeah. Newcastle, not upon Tyne, New South Wales. Above Sydney. No, Australia. Yeah. Because Newcastle upon Tyne and Newcastle in New South Wales is same for coal. That's the common basis. That's why it is Newcastle. So better do your own pyrolysis thing, get it done by someone, use it extensively within the group, and forget about the CPD. Don't create unnecessary problems for yourself. Then you will be struggling. As, Mr. Shahu is struggling. I'm getting 20% variation. He is thinking that all those experimental group of people have reported data which is like Bible. They are not. Trust your own data because you know what is wrong and what is right.
The process of having your own someone understand this thoroughly.
Correct. Exactly.
Simply reading from somebody's publication, don't
No.
understand the
Correct. And also it applies to any field, not just this one. Like Madhu was saying, my seniors have done all these experiments. Who knows? I would strongly suggest, I never allow any of my group members to, students to go out without mix of experimental and modeling. There are some people who towards the reactor. Fantastic experience. They start sweating and we become sedate. So I tell that, look, this is the last time. And for your own benefit, for your own employment prospects later on, you have to tell the employer that I have expertise in both the areas. So in as much as they don't like, force them to like it. They are the ones who will be the beneficiary. No fully 100% modeling or no 100% experiment. If you want to do that, find another supervisor. I'm not good for you. So do it, even if it's a small component. You then realize what is wrong in experimental data. Experimental data as good as your assumptions and your analysis. It can be quite different. So yesterday you were, tomorrow you were presenting. Yes, good. I'm looking forward to it. As soon as I wake up in the morning. So when you say that you two are working in the same area, your thesis will be different. It's in my group as well. So we meet every week.